The great philosopher Confucius was born in the 6th century BC, right around 550. It's somewhat hard to know how to categorize him. Was he a philosopher? Was he a religious founder or leader? What was he exactly? The way you answer that question depends in part on how religion is to be defined, which has always been a very tricky question. Certainly, there are aspects or elements of Confucianism that are recognizably what we would call religious, and it's also the case that he gives us a comprehensive philosophy of life and a worldview. So for my part, I see no problem as identifying him as both a philosopher and a religious founder. What I'm more interested in here now is to situate him in his historical era and to give some idea about the problems that he confronted and the project that he undertook. So again, Confucius was living in the 6th century BC during a time in Chinese history which is called the period of the Warring States. It's a very turbulent period in Chinese history. There were rival fiefdoms, there were tribes at war with one another, and it was marked by a kind of breakdown in traditional morality, human feeling, respect, and the kind of code of honor that had characterized the preceding great dynasty, which was still in living memory. Now, it's typical to call this preceding dynasty, to call it a time during which society was in harmony with the way of heaven. And indeed, you see Confucius make reference to heaven, to the way of heaven, to the decree of heaven, time and again. So what exactly did he mean by that? What is the referent of heaven in Confucius's use? Well, you shouldn't think of heaven as a place that you go when you die, nor even necessarily a place where God dwells. Confucius does speak of decrees of heaven. He speaks of destiny. He says that life and death are a matter of destiny. Health and honor are in the hands of heaven, and so forth. And so he did seem to have some kind of supernatural outlook. But like the Buddha, he refrained from speculating very much about supernatural entities, such as spirits or divine beings or whatever. The focus, again, was much more on the way of heaven, which you can think of as providing a kind of harmonious template which could then be mirrored by human society to bring human society back into line. So once again, like the Buddha, Confucius is more concerned with the immediate problems that need to be fixed in the here and now than he is with speculation. And again, the aim is to restore societal virtue and individual virtue in such a way that it mirrors the way of heaven, the decree of heaven. So then the question then becomes, how do you do this? How do you implement this change? How do we restore the broken state and restore individual virtue? Well, the options on the table during Confucius's time were a little ham-fisted and a little bit bleak. On the one hand, you had people who said, look, the way to bring the people back into line is to establish very specific laws and to enforce them with tough punishments. That'll bring people back into line and restore order. On the other hand, you had people who said, no, the way forward isn't through an imposition of external laws or rules. The way forward is a kind of universal disinterested love towards all people, loving all people equally. Confucius said, no, these are both two extremes that won't really have the effect that its proponents were hoping. On the one hand, it's true that merely imposing external laws and tough punishments wouldn't have the effect of trickling down and changing a person's heart, changing a person's heartfelt orientation towards others. On the other hand, merely telling people to love all and sundry universally, disinterestedly, and so forth is problematic. I mean, For one thing, you're not supposed to love all people in exactly the same way. The love that you should have for your spouse or your child is different than the kind of love you should have for your father, your employer, your ruler, or whatever. On the other hand, again, merely telling people cultivate this feeling of human-heartedness and benevolence towards everyone doesn't give much traction. It doesn't give very tangible instruction on how these virtues should be cultivated. So what Confucius does is he says, look, we need a middle way. In effect, the way is this. We're going to go back we're going to re-examine the last great dynasty. And we're going to examine in particular the modes of ceremony and the ritual propriety that shaped and characterized that period. And we're going to re-implement it exactly, right? So the idea is you need a wedding of the external with the internal. You need some tangible instruction, particularly in the form of ceremony and even what we would call good manners, in order to trickle down and to change the heart, so that the heart then is able to upbuild the state reciprocally, very much like in Plato's Republic. So this is the grand sweeping vision of Confucius. He says, if there is righteousness in the heart, there will be beauty in the character. If there's beauty in the character, there will be harmony in the home. If there's harmony in the home, there will be order in the nation. And if there's order in the nation, there will be peace in the world. This is the Confucian revolution that he's trying to bring about through these means.